Rational Wellness Podcasters. Dr. Ben Weitz here. I'm so glad you could join me today for another episode of the Rational Wellness Podcast. Each week, I'll be bringing you the latest cutting-edge information on health and nutrition. In this media-driven world, it's easy to be confused about what's true and what's not. I'll cut through the conflicting headlines to bring you clarity, to help you optimize your health and maximize your life. Please subscribe to the Rational Wellness Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube. None of the information in this podcast is intended to diagnose any condition, and this podcast is not intended to substitute for going to see your medical doctor and getting sound medical advice. So let's get started on your path to better health.
You think just finding its way in me on.
Welcome, Rational Wellness Podcasters again, and we have a really special guest today. We have Dr. Joel Gould, who's from Modern American Dentistry, and he's an incredibly interesting guy, and we've got some great information to cover on health. Let me give you a little information on Dr. Gould's background. I'll introduce the topic, and then we'll ask Dr. Gould to join us, and I think you're going to be in for some really exciting cutting-edge information. Dr. Gould graduated from the University of Western Ontario in Canada. He practiced dentistry in both rural Canada and in Vancouver, British Columbia for 10 years before he relocated to Los Angeles. Dr. Gould now practices full-time in Manhattan Beach, and he also has offices in Northridge and in Santa Monica, California. Dr. Gould is also involved with helping patients with sleep apnea, and he works with Signature Health as a sleep restoration expert. So our topics for today will be deuterium, sleep apnea, and vitamin D, which are all absolutely crucial for our health. These may seem like totally unrelated topics, but Dr. Gould is going to link all of these together for us. You may recall that I interviewed Dr. Q Collins on episode 9 of this podcast on deuterium and how a ketogenic diet can help to lower deuterium levels. Deuterium is really a cutting-edge, is part of cutting-edge scientific information on how some of the factors that we know that promote health, like diet, exercise, and sleep, work on a molecular level. Vitamin D is perhaps one of the most important nutrients, and we could call it the nutrient of the decade based on the amount of incredible research that has been published on the importance of vitamin D and our health, and how deficiencies in vitamin D are linked to a whole host of diseases, including diabetes and cancer and on and on. And also, it's incredibly astonishing how common deficiencies in vitamin D are. And so vitamin D is also important for our sleep. And we'll talk about how the levels that are considered good are really too low. And we'll also talk about sleep apnea and how it interferes with getting a fully restorative night of sleep and how to fix it. Welcome, Dr. Joel Gould.
Hey, thank you very much. Happy to be here.
That's great. So how does a dentist come to be involved with sleep apnea and deuterium and vitamin D?
That's a great question. And to be honest with you, the story of how I got into it is pretty interesting. So very simply put, I'm a dentist and I practice in Los Angeles. And, through continuing dental education classes, I started to hear a lot about this disease, sleep apnea. And I learned that this is a disease that you get when you get older, you put on weight, you kind of let yourself go, you don't, exercise as much, you maybe don't eat right. And that, it happens when you have a big neck and a fat tongue. And so as I started to get into this, I found it really fascinating because I could see that a lot of my patients had this and didn't have a clue. So I wanted to learn more. And in the investigation of learning how to do home sleep testing, we call that HST, and that's a real sleep test that you do at home. and then get sent to a medical sleep doctor to have looked at and diagnosed to see if you have apnea or not. And that's really going on a lot because it's very expensive to bring people into a sleep lab, and no one really wants to go to a strange facility and have a bunch of wires hooked up to themselves and have somebody watching you and say, okay, sleep normally. So everybody sleeps much more normally in their own home environment. In the process of learning how to do sleep apnea home sleep testing, of course I tested myself. All good doctors experiment on themselves. And it really was kind of a complete shock to me that I had sleep apnea myself. Now, after I saw that I had this disease and I actually had it to a high level, everything changed for me because I said, why would I have sleep apnea? I'm a good person. Sleep apnea only happens to people who don't care about themselves, you know. And it's kind of a joke, but this is how sleep apnea is seen. It's seen as an accusation of poor health. And when I started to ask my patients if they'd even heard of sleep apnea, they would recoil in revulsion and disgust and say, I don't have that. And it's really sad because you can't know if you have it. And the information that I found was so mind-blowing that it just totally took over my life. The interesting part about this is when I found this out, I said, okay, well, I'm not that old. I'm not that fat. Why me? So I started to look into it, and I just really just went on the web, and very quickly I found a neurologist who said basically flat out, and on her YouTube video, there was 19,000 views, much less than a cat video. And you know, and she's a credible scientist, a neurologist, and a clinician, and she basically laid out her case for why vitamin D has anything to do with sleep apnea. So when I found this out, like vitamin D, I said, okay, vitamin D. In dental school, we learned about vitamin D. Vitamin D is important to absorb calcium so that you have strong teeth and bones. If you don't get enough calcium, you'll get rickets. That's a pretty old disease, but it's making a comeback. So I had no idea. Yeah, I had no idea what vitamin D was. And apparently most medical doctors don't have a very strong idea either. So I started to investigate, and I realized that the reason why I had sleep apnea is because I had a severe vitamin D deficiency and I had never been tested. No one ever took my blood work. So when I put the pieces of this puzzle together, this vitamin D and this poor sleep, I started to see, and it was a lot of it was based on, so this particular doctor, her name is Dr. Stasia Gomanak, and her website is drgomanak.com. And just go to her website and read it and just think about what she's saying. Now, I obviously put a lot of thought into this and worked on my own patients to sort of bring my theory together. But it's her information. She basically, and this is published in the Journal of Theoretical Science. So this isn't hard science, but it makes perfect sense. If you know what vitamin D is, then this makes sense. And, we can get into the details of how this all works. But, so this revelation to me, the most important thing is that it let me know that sleep apnea was both preventable and reversible. So when we get into the details of what sleep apnea is, I'll sort of tell you what I do and how I do it. But the interesting part about how did I get to deuterium and what the heck does deuterium have to do with sleep apnea, any of this stuff? So when I had this revelation, I went.
By the way, I'm sure most of our listeners have no idea what deuterium is.
Okay, well, hold on. I'm gonna give you the elevator pitch on deuterium.
Okay.
But so I started testing my patients because I said to myself, if I'm the one who sees people lying flat in the chair with a light shining into their airway, I'm the one who can see these early signs of apnea. If I have sleep apnea, I had no idea. I don't snore. I didn't choke in my sleep. I was fine. I thought I was a great sleeper. I could fall asleep anywhere. And that's the problem. If you can fall asleep anywhere, especially sitting in a car or in your favorite reclining chair, you better go get checked because that's a sign. Sleep deprivation makes it easier for you to sleep anywhere. And especially if you're sitting up. Imagine this, if you lie back and you choke in your sleep, sitting up would be much better. So if you have a hard time sleeping in any position besides sitting up, you probably have apnea. Now, I think everybody should get tested for it, but what I decided to do when I heard my patients' reactions to this horrible thing that they didn't deserve to get as a punishment from God or whatever, such a crazy thing, I decided to I put some questions on my medical history form. Have you been told your vitamin D level is low? Do you awake feeling unrefreshed? And all these different questions. And then I started offering people who showed to me obvious signs of apnea. I sent them home with a pulse oximeter. And I said, sleep with this for 2 nights. And they'd bring it back, drop it off. I would download the results. And I would see very quickly who needed to have a home sleep test and who didn't. And what was interesting is that none of the people, when I said, oh, take a look at this, you're stopping breathing over and over, none of them said, oh, I don't have it. Most of them were like, oh, okay, well, maybe, yeah, you know what? Now come to think of it, I don't feel that good anymore. And so those are the people that I basically sent on for home sleep testing. And sometimes I refer them to,
By the way, Dr.
yeah,
Gould, for those of us who don't know what a pulse
pulse
oximeter,
oximeter.
yeah.
Okay, so pulse oximeter is a very simple, inexpensive device that measures both your heart rate and your oxygen saturation. That's what percent of oxygen you have in your blood. Right now, we're probably all, while we're awake, have about 97, 98% oxygen saturation. When we sleep, that level goes down to about 96, 95, depending, sometimes as low as 94. Now, what this does is it tracks throughout the night your oxygen level that goes up and down. And what we see with almost everybody, even young, healthy people, is the oxygen will go down and up. And as this sort of starts to get longer, we have longer periods where you stop breathing, it'll show up on a pulse oximeter. It measures 4% oxygen drops. Now, if you had a pulse oximeter on your hand, and it goes on your finger, and you've seen these in the hospital, they make that beeping noise. The one I send home with people obviously doesn't. But if you held your breath, you could not make your oxygen go down more than 2%, probably at the most. I've never seen anybody to be able to drop more than 2%. So when you have a 4% oxygen drop, what it means is that you're stopping breathing. And that's part of what apnea is. So I use that pulse oximeter as a screening tool because it's free. I own them. And it's cheap and easy. I send them home and they're very useful. It's a way to quantify what someone's sleep is because you can think that you're not sleeping right, but this gives you a printout. And for some people, they need to see this in black and white or red because every time your oxygen drops below 90%, there's a red mark. And you'll see people stop breathing over and over and over again. And that's what sleep apnea is. Now, when you see this on the big screen, you go, gee, wow, I must be doing that. So it kind of gives you definitive data saying, I have a problem. And it's, for me, this is something that nobody wants to know about. This is the first step in understanding that if you're not sleeping right, you're not healing at night. And if you're not sleeping at night and not healing at night, your body's going to break down and it's going to break down prematurely. So what sleep apnea is, in essence, is premature aging. Now, I know a lot of people think that this is crazy talk, sleep apnea is caused by obesity and a fat neck, but any of you who know what vitamin D is, you know that when your vitamin D level is low, you gain weight. But why do you gain weight? What is the mechanism? So what happened is through viewing my patients and through myself, I was able to put together this strange story of how your sleep, deuterium, and vitamin D are all interconnected. And the story is really fascinating because it would appear that, I better talk about deuterium first because this is just a mystery to people who don't understand this. And I want everyone to know that you should not know what deuterium is unless you're a physicist, all right? And I didn't know, and I Googled it, and I still didn't get it, all right? There's not a lot of information out there. So I'm gonna go right back to the beginning. In the beginning, there was a big bang. And literally, that's where we got to start. So when the Big Bang happened, the elements of the universe were created and flung outward and were expanding. Now, we know that as the sun formed and the gas and the clouds that were here in this area of the universe started to form our solar system with the sun at the center, the Earth was a planet that formed. Now, all of the planets that formed have different elements and different compositions, but almost every planet that we know of has something called deuterium. Now, we know that hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe. But when hydrogen was created, you know that nature doesn't just say, whoa, we'll make one atom. It made a stable hydrogen isotope called deuterium. We'll go back to high school chemistry for a second and say, well, what's a hydrogen atom? It contains an electron and a neutron. And a proton. All right, I can't mess that up. So there's a proton, which is a plus charge in the center of a hydrogen atom, and there's an electron which orbits that proton. That's our simplest element. Now, deuterium has a neutron. So it's got a neutron, a proton, and an electron, and that makes it double the weight of hydrogen, hence the name deuteron. Okay, so deuteronomy is analogous with saying something double. And it makes perfect sense because of all the hydrogen, a certain amount of hydrogen atoms are actually deuterium. So when we look at something like water, which is H2O, we know that a percentage of that water, because it's one oxygen and two hydrogen, some of those water molecules are going to contain deuterium, okay? And we measure deuterium in parts per million, okay? So ocean water is generally 150 parts per million of deuterium, okay? So there's 150 deuterium atoms for 1 million hydrogen atoms. Now, if we think about this, and that this is a normal part of this world, and almost every planet is going to have deuterium, we have to start to understand that this is an element that got incorporated into all biologic life because it's here, and it's in our water, it's in our food chain, it's everywhere. And all of life evolved around this particular stable hydrogen isotope. Now, when you think about, it's actually called heavy water when there's a high amount of deuterium, but it's not radioactive. Heavy water, you're thinking about a non-stable isotope, and that's a radioactive isotope, and that's something that gives off radiation, which is dangerous and completely different. And what's interesting—
Does deuterium have anything to do with the hydrogen bomb?
Not at all.
Okay.
Well, truthfully, if we could go back to those times and think about, I don't know whether they were splitting a deuterium atom, but I kind of doubt it. Who knows? We're talking about some of the most tiny little stuff. If you think about what a cell, how small is a cell, and then go into a cell and go into like the cell membrane, go into mitochondria, and go back to some frightening stuff, the electron transport chain, and then go right down into metabolism, which is essentially going down to the atomic level, where you're making ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate, and it's one chemical bond that you're adding on. Those mitochondria are taking a inorganic phosphate and stuffing it onto an ADP, adenosine diphosphate, and making energy. And we use that one bond. It's like a mini battery, and it goes and powers reactions everywhere. And plants and animals use this. This is the currency of human electricity or plant electricity. This is the most basic level of energy that we use. So this is obviously going to be important, that this whole process has to take into account that there's these deuterium atoms. And what's the big deal? Well, a deuterium atom reacts almost identically to a hydrogen atom, except that it's twice as heavy. And that's it. That should, you should be like, boom, here's what happens. That hydrogen, where we think it's normal, is actually a deuterium atom. And it changes every single structure it gets incorporated into because it's double the weight of hydrogen, but it reacts the same. So if you put a bunch of deuterium atoms into an enzyme, which has, probably, I don't want to say millions, I know my numbers might be off, but some of the atoms in every single enzyme are going to be deuterium. Now you have this enzyme that is based on how it functions from its structure. Enzymes need to have a three-dimensional shape to do their reactions. And now you have this enzyme that has, if your deuterium level goes up, so if you have more deuterium incorporated into your body, now this enzyme has these heavy hydrogen atoms that are distorting and warping the shape. That's the first way that deuterium is dangerous. The second way that deuterium is dangerous is that if these hydrogens get incorporated into DNA, that this is the primary and ultimate cause of mutations, because when you copy this hydrogen or this heavy hydrogen DNA, the copies are flawed. And you know that mutations are really just when your DNA gets copied, that an error gets put in, and then you start to have issues with your cell multiplying quickly. And that's the other thing about deuterium, is that the more deuterium you have, the faster cell growth you have. And you know that rapidly dividing cells are what you would consider to be cancer. So this little thing is the cause of aging, because as these deuterium atoms build up in our body, they make us age, because you can think about the free radical theory of when as free radicals build up in your body, every single part of your tissue becomes more and more deteriorated. And I like, deterioration fits with deuterium because that's the cause. And then that's what we see as aging, when your skin isn't as strong as it used to be, your muscles aren't as strong as they used to be. So what this deuterium is, it's the rate limiting step of our life. When our bodies over time accumulate.
Rate limiting step of our life.
I made that up, but I had to come up with a lot of great sayings, because this is something that's kind of like science fiction. But this is the ultimate cause of aging, cancer, and death. And we'll add one more. And we'll add one more thing: is that it's the cause, or one of the causes, of obesity. Now, no one's going to argue that high fructose corn syrup and sugar and insulin resistance isn't the cause of obesity, but that's the how. I'm going to tell you the why. This is the reason why, though, that diet of those carbohydrates isn't good for you. This is the reason why when you switch to a raw vegan diet, or you start to eat cleanly by having only grass-fed fats, that you lose weight. This is the reason why these high-fat ketogenic diets work, and that's because of deuterium. And what happens is, and this is the most interesting part. Now, I really want to take you back into high school science, and I want to tell you, you remember your mitochondria. Now, mitochondria are thought to be space invaders. They're bacteria that infected an animal millions of years ago, and we basically have a symbiotic relationship, is that we feed these mitochondria whatever fuel we want, and these mitochondria produce energy that we use. This is a symbiotic relationship, and you can think of it like a bird picking food out of a crocodile's teeth, if you want to think about, what a symbiotic relationship is. But we've co-opted these mitochondria into our bodies. And what I love about mitochondria is, your heart's a central pump and it sends blood everywhere. Mitochondria are decentralized. Mitochondria are the power plants of the future, because you all know that solar energy is going to be the power source of the future. There's enough radiation coming off the sun every second of every day to power everything without any pollution. We'll figure that out later, but everyone's going to have at some point a really great solar panel system, so they don't have to be linked to a power grid. Our bodies already did that. They have a decentralized system of power, and you have mitochondria in every single cell except for red blood cells and a couple of other cells. I want to get technical, but these mitochondria power all of your cellular activities by making ATP. You use that ATP to power every single enzymatic and chemical reaction. You use ATP to power some voltage or some calcium ion channels. You use this is what we use. Now, if you don't have enough energy in any of your cells, they don't work right. The cells that need the most energy are cells like your neurons, your retina, your heart. These are powerfully functioning cells. They're burning and churning through a lot of energy. And these are the cells that have the most mitochondria. And as a result, when we have the most mitochondria, we're burning through the most substrate. And that's why the tissues that have these higher levels of mitochondria, they get full of deuterium because they're burning more fuel. Now, where is deuterium hiding? Just to make this easy, it's in sugar and carbohydrates, okay? And when we process carbohydrates and we hydrogenate vegetable oils, we hydrogenate them by adding hydrogen, and that hydrogen is very heavy in deuterium. One more sad feature is when we selectively choose fruit, what we're doing is we're picking the fastest growing, biggest fruits and vegetables, and those are the ones with the most deuterium. So we've actually thinking we're doing the right thing by making more beautiful fruit, more delicious, sweeter, is we were actually concentrating something that was natural in our environment. And deuterium in fruit that our ancestors ate, the hunter-gatherers, their fruit was bitter and chewy and probably only in season. And so we've kind of perverted what fruit is over the last 10,000 years when we started farming. So now here we are with these mitochondria that have been incorporated into every animal on this planet.
Haven't we sort of perverted almost everything in the last 10,000 years?
We sure have, but we did this one thinking this was a good thing, selective breeding. This makes sense. Pick the healthiest fruit. Makes perfect sense why this happened to us. We made all these choices that made perfect sense, but we didn't have a microscope. We didn't have an electron scanning microscope. We didn't know this stuff, okay? So when you process, when you get in, okay, so we're going to go back to the mitochondria, and you have to remember the electron transport chain. And I want you to know that when I got into this, I had been 30 years out of my undergraduate biology. So I thought, what am I going to do? Am I going to get a textbook? Am I going to hire a tutor to I don't know what the electron transport chain, I don't remember the Krebs cycle. And there's this really incredible invention that young people know about. It's called YouTube. And you can go there and you can Google electron transport chain, and you can see a 3-minute video where you can see what that is and have a recollection of, like, oh yeah, I remember I blocked that out because it was so horrible, the Krebs cycle. So before we get to the Krebs cycle, I'm only going to speak on it briefly, and you will not need to remember any reactions. What you need to know is that if you remember the production of energy, and really simply put, the mitochondria has an inner membrane where a protein complex called ATP synthase, because this protein complex synthesizes ATP, is embedded in the inner mitochondrial membrane. Now, adjacent and all around that are the other protein complexes. There's 4 that you can think of, or whatever you want to know. It depends on what you remember, but that little video that you can see will refresh your memory. These are other protein complexes that are also embedded into the inner membrane of the mitochondria. And it's the job of these complex protein enzyme things to basically take the fuel that you eat, whether it's sugar, fat, or protein, and cut it up initially through the Krebs cycle, which we'll get back to, but ultimately your body has a way of pumping out protons of the out of the inner membrane of mitochondria and transporting electrons across the membrane to ultimately produce, as the protons come back into the inner membrane, they spin this ATP synthase protein complex. It's like a rotor. It's like a hydroelectric dam. And the rotation of that rotor produces ATP. And we generate power exactly like a hydroelectric dam. I kind of joke and say this is your own personal hydroelectric dam where, in a hydroelectric dam, water comes in, it spins a rotor, it generates electricity. Now, if you have this hydroelectric dam, there's a bunch of logs, and a log comes in, it jams the rotor, and now you can't produce energy anymore. And that's exactly what happens with deuterium. When these heavy hydrogen atoms enter into the ATP synthase complex, they're so heavy that this whole delicate protein that's spinning at 9,000 RPM, imagine that's the exact same speed as a car engine, this thing just starts to wobble and breaks because this is designed to have a hydrogen, not a deuterium, all right? And that is the basis of reduced energy production, which accounts for obesity and poor cellular function, okay? Now, before we get into what that really means, because I'll make it very simple about how profound this one little thing is, I want you to go back to the Krebs cycle. Now, there are 10 enzymatic steps to break a sugar molecule in half, and it only yields 2 ATP. It's a very poor yield for this very expensive system of these enzymes. There's all the different steps that it goes through, and trust me, this is not fascinating stuff, but what's fascinating is that each enzymatic step is your body's highly evolved method of removing a hydrogen atom from that substrate, whether it's sugar, fat, or protein, to make sure it's not a deuterium atom, because that deuterium atom will break ATP synthase. So we have evolved around this particular element, and every single body system we have is like, whoa, we don't want that in here. And so there's all these systems that we have to eliminate or deplete deuterium. And the expression deuterium depleted is going to be something that people aren't going to be able to not say, because we don't want this in our body. And this is happening every second that we're producing energy, because your mitochondria are producing energy on a second by second, minute by minute basis. They take oxygen, they take fuel and some other stuff, and they produce energy, okay? And if you don't breathe, they die. If they don't get fuel, they die. And this is the basis of being alive. And this is why when you stop breathing, and that's why I've got a job, because your airway is pretty important, with 3 minutes without breathing, you're done, okay? Now, what this really means is that this one little thing is so dangerous to us that 10 enzymatic steps in the Krebs cycle. You thought that was just to punish you in high school. So this is fascinating. So as these hydrogens get plucked off, they get put together and get eliminated. We have all these proteins that grab them and carry them, and we're going to eliminate them later, okay? But the hydrogen atoms that get in, the protons that make it into the inner membrane, those are not deuterium atoms. So those hydrogen atoms are very special. And what happens is they get put together with oxygen to make H2O, water, and that's called metabolic water. We make our own water. And where this is fascinating is that there are desert animals like camels that make their own water, and that's why they can go through the desert. So without drinking is because they have a lot of fat. And if you think about the structure of fat, there's an awful lot of those hydrogens, that terrible saturated fat with all those hydrogen atoms that was so toxic, beef fat and coconut oil. This is the fuel that your body really likes, because using fat, that fat, if it's grass-fed fat, is deuterium depleted. So your body loves having grass-fed food because it doesn't get sucked into this whole deuterium overload, okay? And that's really what's happening. If you eat too much sugar and too many carbohydrates, you overwhelm your body's ability to handle this deuterium, and you break all of your little delicate ATP synthases, and you can no longer produce energy.
So you're making an interesting point, which is that the benefit of grass-fed beef may be that it's lower in deuterium because the cows eat grass, rather than the fact that it's lower in saturated fat.
Well, so this is so everybody listening to this should already know that eating fat does not cause you to get fat. unless you eat artificial fats that's been hydrogenated. And that's why grass-fed anything is so important. But why grass? What's so important about grass and grass-fed?
Well, I always thought that grass had higher levels of omega-3s, and that's why it was beneficial.
Well, there's a lot of different reasons why that could be considered beneficial, but ultimately, we're talking about something. One of the people who works at Signature Health or is associated with it is Dr. Laszlo Boros, and this is his research with cancer and reversal of cancer with deuterium is really the cutting edge of all science. And this is a very simple, basic understanding: is that animals evolved on this planet. Now, certain animals only eat grass. We can look at different animals that eat different things. And I want to go back into the Deuteronomy talk here for a second because of this religious component. But I'm Jewish, and my mother kept kosher growing up. And she did a bunch of weird stuff that didn't make any sense to me at the time, like getting meat from a kosher butcher and salting the beef in the sink when she'd get it back. And that's one of the Jewish laws. Salt will draw blood out of meat, and blood is where the deuterium is hidden. So there's this really weird component of these people figured out that certain animals were healthier to eat, and those are considered clean animals, animals that have a split or cloven hoof, animals that chew their cud, animals that eat grass, fish that are not filter feeders. And the reason is that these animals, fish with scales are kosher. These animals all deplete deuterium. Shellfish just filter seawater. Seawater is 150 parts per million. Shellfish aren't discriminating. They're going to have a lot of deuterium when you eat shellfish. You can still eat them, but this is why these foods are considered clean, is that they're deuterium depleted. So this is why. So when we get back to the grass, what makes grass so special is that it's the color green. Now, when the sun shines on grass, what happens is you get photosynthesis. Now, chloroplasts are identical to mitochondria. They're just the plant version, and they produce ATP just like we do. So what happens in photosynthesis is that we use the energy of the sun to split water into hydrogen and oxygen. Now, the wavelength of green isn't strong enough to split a lot of water that has deuterium. So if you have a bunch of groundwater that's high in deuterium and you have the sun shining on this grass, most of the water that gets separated and most of the hydrogen they get incorporated into protein, fat, or sugar, whatever the plants decided to make. These hydrogen atoms, these are deuterium depleted because the energy of the sun in the green wavelength isn't strong enough to easily separate a lot of deuterium. Now, when you're in the tropical sun, and it's much more powerful, much more deuterium will be separated from water in photosynthesis. But when you're not in tropical sun, then there's a less opportunity for that. So anything that's green, any green leafy plants are naturally deuterium depleted, but they will vary in their deuterium level depending on the groundwater. But think of this, we haven't gone into the talk that deuterium is heavy, so we find more deuterium at lower altitudes and elevations and less at higher altitudes and elevations. And I can explain this to you very simply. Heavy hydrogen goes lower. If you have make ice of heavy hydrogen, it's going to sink to the bottom rather than rise to the top like normal ice. The parts per million of water at the Sahara Desert, one of the lowest parts on Earth, is about 180 parts per million, and the deuterium level at mountain elevation spring water could be as low as 90 parts per million. So this is really based on elevation of this planet, and that's why the lower you go, the more deuterium you get. This is really, it's quite fascinating that this all happens. So back to that green grass, is that green grass, through the wonders of the universe and how we were designed by the laws of physics, say that green things that are grown through photosynthesis, they're naturally deuterium depleted. And now animals that eat green grass are also deuterium depleted because they are able to maintain a lower level of deuterium than everywhere around them. And that's why you are what you eat, or you are what you eat eats.
So that's really interesting. So this is another explanation, once again, for now why green vegetables are so beneficial. And, we've been thinking that the main reason why green vegetables are so beneficial is that they're very alkaline, that they contain high levels of vitamin K and vitamin D and other nutrients. And now you're giving us another explanation for why green vegetables are so beneficial, because they're lower in deuterium.
Yes. Well, and it's one of my favorite statements, and, is everything is multifactorial. It's never just one thing. Sometimes it's much more of one thing, but we don't live in a vacuum, and we live in an ecosystem and an environment, and we have to really take into account most things. And, so there's lots of benefits for green grasses, and but this is the primary. This is when you take it down to an atomic level. Sure, they have higher levels of antioxidants, but you have to understand that our bodies have lots of different ways of dealing with antioxidants, so or dealing with free radicals. So this is one more reason why this high-fat, grass-fed diet is important. And to me, when I discovered all this, I was kind of, I live in Los Angeles. I go to Irwan. I go to the healthiest stores, around, and there is no high-fat, grass-fed section yet. But there clearly is going to have to be. And the cool part about this is that our technology and our science and our mass farming, which is a disaster with this GMO farming of pesticides, is that we can actually grow grass. We can grow high quality grass. We just can't do it the way that's being done. And we're not going to be able to do this. So there's going to be ways to do algae in the ocean. There's going to be lots of ways in the future to make this deuterium depleted fuel for our animals. But this is what we're stuck with. If you're a vegan, this is really hard, because you don't get all the nutrients without eating a lot of animal fat. And sorry to give anybody a hard time who's a super vegan, but hunter-gatherers were not. Every human out there was eating animal meat, and then we weren't just eating like a fillet. We were eating the guts and the brains, and we probably went for the guts and the brains first. So we were getting a lot of this natural grass-fed deuterium depleted protein and fat, and that's sort of how we evolved. When we started growing grains 10,000 years ago, good for the people, but bad for the body. So I want to link together the vitamin D part and the sleep apnea because it goes a bit crazy. So maybe, I guess
Wait, Dr. Gould,
yeah.
It's so hard to get you talking. I really have to pry the information out of you.
I know. People have said I'm passionate about this, but what's funny is that there's so little that you've already heard of the story. So just on a very simple level, I have autoimmune disease, and I have had Crohn's disease my whole life, and I've been a heavy person most of my life. And this understanding and the discovery of these things that went wrong with our bodies has allowed me to change completely, and I no longer have any Crohn's symptoms. And it's a very fascinating story, and I put it down in a book. My book is called The Modern Epidemic, and the reason I called it that is because this is an epidemic and it's worldwide. It can't be passed from one person to another. It's happening to everybody, and what it is a disconnection of the human animal from its evolutionary origins. We were hunter-gatherers for 99% or 99.9% of our evolutionary history, and it's only recently that we've completely disconnected ourselves from the evolution of these bodies, where we walked barefoot, we ate natural foods, and we didn't wear sunscreen or hats. And that's where we go into vitamin D. Because what I want people to understand about vitamin D, everyone listening to this, probably a lot of alternative medical care providers. I hate that word alternative because it should be mainstream, because nutrition and prevention, they're not alternative. That's what we should be doing. Allopathic medicine and treating the symptoms of a disease, that should be alternative. And we like allopathic medicine. It can save lives. But why wouldn't we want to restore our organic bodies to what they were supposed to have before we took those medications? And I've used those medications to get out of crises, but now that my body's healthy, I don't have those issues anymore. And not everybody's going to have the same fantastic recovery that I had, but once you read my story, you may actually want to try it because it's organic. There's no side effects. A lump won't form on your neck, and you won't have suicidal thoughts. So you may want to look at this before you try some of those other. One of my favorite commercials from the pharmaceutical industry was a woman at the Santa Monica Pier wistfully looking at the restroom lineup, and you see the Ferris wheel behind her, and she's thinking, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to wait in that line. And every person with IBD, Crohn's, colitis, that's what our minds focus on. I could be in the most important meeting of my life, but I'll be thinking, where are the bathrooms around here? How many times on a date did I have to excuse myself in the middle of dinner and then come back a little later? So these are the things that prey on people's minds. These pharmaceutical industries, and I can't blame them. They don't have a mandate to protect us. Their mandate is to make money. They instill fear into people like me, like, oh my God, I better take that drug because I don't want to be stuck and make a mess of myself out in public. That'd be embarrassing. It's very hard for people like myself. I'm an adult male. I'm a qualified, happy person, but running a program for bathrooms in the back of my mind for 48 years of my life was not great. 2 years ago, it all completely ended. So it's kind of fascinating, but this is important because our health is about giving our bodies the essential elements that we evolved to have. And that includes things that people do like magnesium, your supplement, the different things that are missing, kelp, iodine, very important to do because we're no longer hunter-gatherers. But what got me into all this vitamin D stuff is that when I found this particular neurologist who said vitamin D is the cause, and her theory, which is fascinating and true, is that our brain stems, our autonomic nervous system, the control of all of our housekeeping duties, our circulation, our digestion, and our sleep, These neurons control all of that. Now, if you take these neurons and you decrease their efficacy, everything they control will get sloppy. And that's what sleep apnea is. Sleep apnea is an outward sign or symptom of this real disease. And this disease is a centrally mediated hormone deficiency, okay? Sorry, the centrally mediated disease caused by a hormone deficiency. That hormone is vitamin D. And the reason I say that is because—
So what do you mean by centrally mediated?
Okay, so centrally mediated means that people think that sleep apnea is an obstruction in your airway, okay? They think there's something blocking. Could be a fat tongue, could be tonsils, could be anything. Now, technically that could be true, but the reality is if I didn't have sleep apnea before and then I'm diagnosed with it later, has the structure of my airway changed? No. This is about the control of my airway, the muscular control of my airway during the paralysis of sleep. And that's what sleep apnea is. That's what snoring is. When the control of your airway and your soft palate begins to be too relaxed, your soft palate flutters and starts to make a noise. Well, the reason that your soft palate is fluttering is because the neural control of your autonomic nervous system isn't fine-tuned enough. It's getting sloppy. And the reason it's getting sloppy is that the neurons that control this whole area that's critical to life itself, your airway, this whole area isn't having the neural finite definitive control that it needs. And that's because these bodies were designed in equatorial Africa with unlimited sunshine. And vitamin D was never an issue. It was like, to us, it was like water. Now, what I describe vitamin D like is vitamin D dehydration. In the 1960s or 70s, if you went to the hospital feeling sweaty and dizzy, and you could be diagnosed with dehydration. If they gave you water, the doctors would be like, oh, awesome, this patient recovered. And they'd say, well, this water is pretty fascinating stuff. Let's start to give it to other people who are sick. And lo and behold, all these people with this syndrome, this nausea and feeling weak and dizzy, they all had a miraculous recovery. We should start to do trials with this miracle water. But what I'm getting at is that we figured out pretty quickly that our bodies work best being hydrated. And we even learned to carry around a water bottle with us so that we'd stay hydrated. And we were really smart. If we were going to exercise and it was hot, we would pre-load our bodies with water so that we wouldn't get dehydrated. Now we could take that lesson and turn it on to vitamin D and say this: you and your doctor are thinking about this supplement like you're thinking about vitamin C. Vitamin C is a cofactor that helps to activate some enzymes that makes your life better, makes your immune system work better. Vitamin D is a hormone or a pre-hormone that affects every single cell in your body, and vitamin D is not a supplement, it's a messaging molecule. What it is, it's a proxy for the season and sunshine. When the sun hits our bodies, it produces vitamin D out of cholesterol that's in our skin. And what we do is we take that vitamin D because it's very special. And when you use that, we take the energy from the sun. And this is one of my catchphrases, is that we are solar powered animals. We make vitamin D and we make a bunch of other things like nitric oxide and something called cholesterol sulfate when we're in the sun. So there's a bunch of different reactions that are powered by sunshine. And you all know about an enzyme called endothelial nitric oxide synthase that we like to call eNOS because that's much easier and it sounds even cute. But this particular enzyme is powered by sunshine. Its cofactor is sunlight. Instead of having a cofactor chemical element bind to this enzyme to make it active, the power of sunshine turns it on. And you know it for it making nitric oxide when the sun hits your skin. But it doesn't just make nitric oxide, it does something else. It makes cholesterol sulfate, which is a whole different discussion. But anyway, what you need to know is that we're taking this energy in off the sun and we're using it to power our bodies. So this was something that as a design system, we were meant to have in abundance. We were never meant to have a lower amount. And what we really see is that when we give people who have low vitamin D levels some amount of the supplement, it could be 1,000 IU or 2,000 IU if you're a medical doctor, or 5 to 10,000 IU if you're a naturopathic doctor. But what you're doing, and when we do this, we see these people miraculously get better. We go, wow, this really helped and these diseases are reduced. What you're actually doing is you're restoring a human animal with a chemical signaling molecule that your body relies on for so many different pathways. This is our, it's basically, I call it a universal Allen key because it fits into every situation. When vitamin D is formed, it's very unique because it has two different forms. It's planar, it's flat, and it's bowl-shaped, and it moves around, and it has a very unique vibrational energy. The hydrogens that are stuck on vitamin D resonate very uniquely, And again, this was designed by the laws of physics of Mother Nature. This is normal. So vitamin D is made from cholesterol on your skin, or 7-dehydroxycholesterol if you want to get technical. But vitamin D, when it's created on cholesterol that's already been sulfated. So you have a cholesterol molecule, it's already had a sulfate group attached by enos, and that molecule, when hit by the sun, turns into vitamin D. So when you take supplements, you are getting very similar. It's not exactly the same, and it's something for a later discussion of the difference between supplements and natural vitamin D. But this basic reaction is us taking energy off the sun. And so I started to think about how wrong science is in viewing this as a supplement, and that every single person that I test has a vitamin D level of under 35, some people as low as 9, is that all we're doing is we're looking at people whose bodies are breaking down without enough of this powerful hormone. Now, the tie into deuterium is that if vitamin D is regulating your brainstem, and you need to have a high level of vitamin D to sleep properly, once you start to sleep poorly, you don't get into the normal stages of sleep. Now, we'll go back to this deuterium stuff and how do we get rid of it? Deuterium is collected throughout your body, stuck onto some binding proteins like everything else to get into your blood, and then we eliminate it when it's in your brain. You have to get into REM, rapid eye movement, which changes the porosity of your neurons and allows your body to flush out these toxins. Now, this isn't a surprise to you to know that if you don't get into REM sleep, then you're not going to clean out all these toxins, and this is the basis for neurodegenerative diseases. So now that you're not eliminating this toxin, it's starting to build up in your body. And that's why I say that deuterium and vitamin D have an inversely proportional relationship. So if your vitamin D level is high, your body's healthy, you're sleeping right, your body's using all of its systems of deuterium depletion, and you're getting rid of it every night while you sleep. Now, you get rid of it when you exhale as well, a different discussion, because we do have, when we, our breath is deuterium depleted because we've eliminated a lot of the deuterium in our bodies, and we're getting rid of it through our lymphatic system, which is the lymphatic drainage system for the brain, and our lymphatic system in our bodies. We've evolved around getting rid of this thing. But the epidemic that's going on is that people are running out of vitamin D for two separate reasons that are really strange. Number one, is sun avoidance, sunscreen, computers, more time indoors, air conditioning, all of the social evolution reasons that we just don't get that same amount of sun. But there's a second reason why everyone's running out of vitamin D, and that's because as you increase the deuterium level in your body's ability to make vitamin D as the UVB radiation hits your skin is decreased, because when deuterium atoms get incorporated into cholesterol in your body, which they do because your cholesterol has hydrogen, and this deuterium will get incorporated everywhere, is that bond that UVB radiation breaks to turn cholesterol into vitamin D can't be broken as easily. And so my hypothesis was that, why do we make less vitamin D as we age? Well, we build up deuterium over our lifespan. And as that happens, we make less and less and less vitamin D on our skin. And in the old days, what would happen is as we get to a certain level, we'd run out of enough vitamin D for our brain stems to run properly, and we get sleep apnea. And that used to be when you were 75 or 80 or later, because people worked outside, they ate whole foods, our foods had vitamin D. Now it's happening so much earlier. So what we used to consider dementia, joint pain, insomnia, digestive issues, these are all vitamin D deficiency issues. And then once that happens and you've had your vitamin D level low enough for long enough, your sleep program gets fried because your body isn't healing when you sleep. And then people will decline into death. This is happening to people as young as 5 years old, this lower vitamin D.
And let me also mention,
Sure.
Another factor is the drive to get our cholesterol levels as low as we can. And this is a big push from big pharma to get statins into the drinking water, to constantly have a lower and lower target for LDL and cholesterol. And so,
Right.
We end up with no cholesterol to be able to produce vitamin D and the other hormones that we need for brain function.
Well, okay, so that's exactly right. But there's one aspect of that that's actually a little more frightening, is that you have to understand that what doctors are doing when they test your cholesterol level, you need to think of it this way. What's supposed to happen is that your body needs to take this cholesterol and get it to everywhere to patch things up. I call cholesterol your own mini repairman, because your body pumps it around, and this gets stuffed into all your cell membranes and muscles. It gets incorporated in there to help strengthen and renew your muscles. We produce new cholesterol from either synthesis or foods that we eat, and we use it to refresh our muscles. Now, this cholesterol is supposed to be sulfated by the sun, and when it's sulfated, a sulfur group is attached to the cholesterol, and it becomes hydrophilic. and go into your bloodstream. Now, no one's measuring your cholesterol sulfate level because that's how we're supposed to get cholesterol all around our bodies. And also, when you think of it this way, if your body wants to get cholesterol somewhere, it can't put it into the blood because cholesterol is hydrophobic. So it packages it into binding proteins, which are known as LDLs and HDLs. So now we have this molecule floating around in your blood, which is supposed to represent what you're eating. And what it really is your body's like, holy cow, there's no cholesterol sulfate. We got to make regular cholesterol and put it out in these little cholesterol boats to get it where it needs to go because cholesterol won't go into the blood. So when you take statins, it's really dangerous. I can't think of any good reason to take statins because the reality is, this is the stuff that I have in my book, thousands of studies showing that when you go in the sun, your cholesterol gets lowered because you make more cholesterol sulfate and your body doesn't need to package it up. And you can look into a guy by the name of Dr. David Grimes. He wrote a book that's 600 pages called Cholesterol and the Importance of Sun. And he puts correlation after correlation after correlation of where people live and their heart health and their cholesterol. And that's why part of the things in my book is very controversial. I'm saying that your diet has a lot to do with your heart disease, but not the way that you think. What heart disease is really caused by is a lack of sunshine. And, it's a sort of a bigger topic to get into, but we still haven't gotten back to sleep apnea, but this is the vitamin D component. So basically back to the deuterium vitamin D thing, one of the other things is that having a high level of vitamin D is protective in your mitochondria. Your vitamin D shields ATP synthase and makes the water around the rotor as it spins less viscous. So when your vitamin D level is high, you're actually changing the voltage of the membranes. You're making the whole production of energy easier. So that's why when you increase someone's vitamin D level, they get healthier. But as you increase that vitamin D level, even if those rotors are getting broken, you're cushioning the blow by making the environment that you produce energy in much easier. That ATP synthase is spinning at a much higher velocity and it's producing energy much more efficiently. But not only that, vitamin D is critical for you to make all these proteins that get embedded into the inner mitochondrial membrane that are part of the electron transport chain. So when your vitamin D level is high, or should I say evolutionary, then you're making all of these proteins because now your body has what it needs, okay? And so one of the effects of vitamin D that a lot of people don't know about it has genomic effects. And what that means is vitamin D receptors are everywhere in your body. And when vitamin D comes around, it unlocks certain things, especially your DNA, and helps it to unwind to allow for transcription and the copying of the genes that are enclosed in your DNA. And people think that disease is genetic in origin. My genes are flawed just like I did, but that's not true at all. Disease is epigenetic. It's how we access our genes. So what vitamin D does is it allows more of your DNA to be accessed. And this is fascinating because if you think about it, so vitamin D is there. It tells your DNA, make more copies. These copies go out to the endoplasmic reticulum, which is your cell's manufacturing facility. You make all these proteins that we use that get formed into enzymes and your cytoskeleton, and all the structural elements of your body are made from copies of your DNA. I like to say that DNA is a library or your blueprint for every single chemical that you make. It's not a stuffy old library. It's a vibrant, alive library that we access every minute of every day. And what vitamin D does is it acts directly on your DNA to allow for your DNA to be unwound, to be copied. So when your vitamin D level is low, you are not producing your enzymes, your proteins, everything that should normally be made at a lower level. And you can think about this, I call it human power saving mode, because as your D level goes down, as the fall comes and it goes lower and lower and lower, your body starts to shut down the more esoteric features of being healthy and alive, slowly cutting off the functions that make you healthy. And as it goes lower and lower and lower, you're down into power saving mode because your body has been through so many experiences of natural selection where only the fittest survive. So those people who can hunker down and store enough of this magical chemical element that keeps us alive to make it through a winter, you shut down all of your non-essential enzymatic functions and all this other stuff. But your body does this through natural selection, so it's a gradual shutdown. And as you raise that vitamin D level back up again, you get access to those genes. Now, winter and lighter skin and all that is as we migrated away from the equator, our skin became lighter because vitamin D is such a powerful evolutionary driver that those with darker skin couldn't make enough vitamin D and they died for all of the obvious reasons. They didn't sleep right. Their bodies became overwhelmed with deuterium in their environment. They just weren't healthy enough. Women who are vitamin D deficient, who even get pregnant, which it can definitely affect your fertility, they can't have a normal delivery if the pelvic bones are too soft. So natural selection has made a system that's basically vitamin D and deuterium. And I say it's the angel and the devil. Vitamin D is your guardian angel, and deuterium is the devil. Now we have to, I call it a little devil. It's got to be cute because we need deuterium in our bodies to control things as part of our biology. But it's a seesaw. I don't know if you say this here in Canada, we say a teeter-totter. I don't know if that's a thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so when your D is high, your deuterium's low, and when your D is low, your deuterium's high. You don't sleep right, your body doesn't function properly, and deuterium starts to build up in your body. Now imagine your brainstem controlling your sleep, because it does. Your brainstem controls everything, controls your digestion, controls your circulation. Now when these neurons don't have enough vitamin D, they don't function well. But if this goes on long enough and you start to sleep poorly, this deuterium starts to build up in these neurons, and they start to kill your mitochondria. And as the level of deuterium builds up in your mitochondria, the amount of power you produce decreases, and when a cell doesn't have enough ATP, it doesn't function right. And as this goes on over time, everything that your brainstem controls, which is everything, starts to deteriorate or deuteriorate. And what we see is obesity, aging, cancer, and disease. And that's the equation. So vitamin D is a miracle cure. It's something these bodies evolved to have a lot of. And having a high vitamin D level protects you from the dangers of deuterium, except that this was a great system until we messed it all up by doing farming techniques, by domesticating animals and changing what they eat and growing food. We really messed this up. So if you were a hunter-gatherer and lived in the wild, you would live a long life because you didn't have these toxins, and you'd be drinking the food of your environment. It would be correlated with the amount of sunlight. So if you lived in the tropics and you ate a bunch of sugary fruit has a bunch of deuterium, but you'd also be getting all this UVB radiation, and your vitamin D level would be very high. So there'd be a buffer. When you lived in the north during wintertime, there'd be very little fruit for you to eat. The food would be really low in deuterium. You wouldn't have these things, but your vitamin D level would be low. So it was a balanced system. In the summer, when the sun is high, you're making a lot of vitamin D, that's when you'll find your fruit. So it's the ecosystem. Mother Nature is a genius. And this ecosystem is great until we come along all smart, thinking we're going to improve everything, and we really destroy everything. So when it comes to sleep apnea, what sleep apnea really is, it's a centrally mediated syndrome. It's really just the outward signs of the dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system. And the reason it's so important is that because we can see it, we can hear it, you can hear it as snoring. But not only that, if you're not sleeping right, your body doesn't heal right. Because the other important stage of sleep is deep sleep. And deep sleep is when our bodies repair, and we need to be paralyzed so that we grow evenly. And we need to restore all the chemicals and all the hormones. And I don't know if everybody knows this, but we only release all the hormones that we build up and store in deep, slow wave sleep. We have to get into that brain pattern to start to release it in pulses, these hormones. Now, if you keep on getting your sleep interrupted, which is what sleep apnea is, you don't release all the hormones that you're supposed to release. And one great example of this is when people wake up a couple of times a night to pee, they think it's because they drank too much water. Well, antidiuretic hormone is made by our bodies, and it prevents our bladders from giving us the feeling to pee. So what really happens if you're waking up multiple times in the night, maybe you drank too much water a couple of times, but primarily it is your body, and this is the strange part, is that when you have these arousals where you stop breathing, very often you won't wake up, but sometimes you will wake up and you'll have a full bladder and be like, oh, I woke up because I had to pee. But you probably woke up from an arousal, or you woke up because your bladder didn't have enough of antidiuretic hormone to hold that urine in, and your brain was like, oh, I got to go get up and pee. So this syndrome is what people think is normal when they get older. Their prostate swells, well, your PSA score is linked to your sleep and your vitamin D. And, the things that we associate with getting older, poor sleep, aching joints, this is all just the human body's breakdown without enough of the essential elements of life. And that is, magnesium, vitamin D, sleep. This is what's happened to us. So as a dentist treating sleep apnea, I'm fascinated by this because when you understand how this works, this is a reversible disease. And having a ketogenic diet or having a high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet is key and critical. But sunshine is also important because we don't, not only do we make vitamin D and those other photochemical products, but in sunlight, our mitochondria work more efficiently. So having some amount of sunlight in your life is good. You don't have to suntan, but you should definitely get some
Dr. Gould,
yes, sir.
Let me interrupt you because we're starting to run out of time.
Right.
So, I'd like to have you finish this idea of sleep apnea. So maybe in the remaining minutes we have, can you touch on some of the important ways we test for sleep apnea, and then what are some of the treatments?
Right. Okay. So sleep apnea, the most important thing to understand is that it's not just obese people. It could be anyone and everyone. Anybody who's been vitamin D deficient for a long time is a likely candidate. Anyone who has toenail fungus is a likely candidate. So we detect sleep apnea through either being witnessed. If you're a husband or wife, your spouse stops breathing, they do that. They stop, and this is what apnea is. If you snore, you don't necessarily have apnea. Snoring could just be the early signs that you're being overwhelmed with deuterium and your vitamin D level is too low. If you're younger and you snore, restoring your vitamin D level can eliminate the snoring. And we can see snoring disappear within 2 days if you take the right dose of vitamin D. So we witness this by our bed partners, and some people wake up or they have sleep paralysis where they can't move and they wake up. That's a sign of apnea. And some people wake up a lot and they know they're choking. They don't want to know more about apnea because they don't want to wear the CPAP because it's like a death sentence. But the information I want to get out is this is reversible. So you want to know early. If you think you have sleep apnea, you want to request a home sleep test or a sleep study from your doctor. And then so we diagnose this by going to a sleep lab and having a sleep doctor look at our sleep study, or doing a home sleep test and sending it to a sleep doctor. Once you have the diagnosis of sleep apnea, then we can go from there. You have 3 treatment choices: surgery, which now I don't recommend except in some of the most extreme cases. We have a CPAP machine that works for everybody but is not easy to wear. We have a dental device that works great for people who are younger and healthier and are early in the disease. So if you think you have apnea, you want to get to this as early as possible, and that's why dentists are involved. Only dentists can work in the mouth. We have all the right equipment. So once you get a diagnosis of apnea, it's based on a score called your AHI, your apnea-hypopnea index, how many times you stop breathing every hour for 10 seconds or more. So if you have an AHI of 5, if you stop breathing for 10 seconds or more than 5 times an hour, you have apnea. Now that's early or mild. Once you get to 30 times per hour, that's mild to moderate, and anything over 30 is advanced apnea. And those are the people we really want to put on a CPAP machine. Although if you won't wear a CPAP, an oral device can help you. Okay, so it's better than nothing. Now, this AHI score is deceptive because it's a Medicare definition, and this is what insurance companies and doctors base their compensation on. But if you stop breathing for 7 seconds, 20 times, you'll come back with a diagnosis that you don't have apnea, but you'll feel as sick, and you will be as sick as somebody who really has the real diagnosis. So this is where some people who have gone for a sleep study have been told, you don't have apnea, and they go home and they go, well, I don't sleep right. What do I do? And there's no solution. This is the reason why. Apnea is a line that they drew at this point, 5. And people who have comorbidities or diabetes or high blood pressure, those are the people that usually have a higher AHI because they've been sicker longer. Their brainstem hasn't been working. They haven't been depleting deuterium. Their vitamin D's are running out. Their body doesn't work right. They're stuck in power saving mode. So when it comes to treating apnea, I obviously have a problem that encompasses the whole human because I know this isn't just something you stick in someone's mouth and splint the airway open. But if you think of it this way, once you're not healing properly in sleep, you have to splint the airway open to allow oxygen flow so that your body can get into those normal stages of sleep. And then your brainstem can start to heal too, because if your body isn't healing, your brainstem is part of your body. And once that isn't getting restored to sleep, it can't function right. So to repair or reverse sleep apnea, you have to go ahead and splint the airway open and then restore the missing elements. And I have a whole program for that. And obviously I put all my patients on a ketogenic diet. And this is really the ultimate cure, is restoring the body to what it needs to have. And in a nutshell, that's really what sleep apnea is. So that explains sort of why people who've thought they've had it don't have it. And people who are in denial, wake up and get treated now, because this is real and it's only going to delay your future recovery from this disease. It affects everything.
That's awesome, Dr. Gould. What an incredible amount of information. Boy, this podcast was so rich in great information and a lot of useful ideas for things to improve our health and sleep and deuterium and sleep apnea and vitamin D. So, this is organic too. So that's the one thing I wanted to point out, is that this is a natural way to heal yourself. And who wants to be on medications their whole life? Right. And who wants to be on a sleep apnea CPAP machine the rest of their life too? So you've got a program where they may need to use a sleep apnea CPAP machine or another device, but it could be temporary, or most likely will be temporary if they make the diet and lifestyle changes, and then they can turn their health around. They won't need it.
That's correct. And that's why when doctors say, oh, you have apnea, lose weight and your apnea will disappear. Well, it's nonsense. It won't disappear, but it'll be reduced because you'll do all the right things. But now we have the tools to understand how do we lose weight and why do we. People who don't sleep right, they're not going to lose weight. You have to, if you've tried to lose weight and it's not working, this is why. This is the answer. So, but this is such a complex topic, but it pulls together sleep apnea, vitamin D deficiency, ketogenic diet, all in one. It's kind of crazy. It all goes to one place.
Right.
And that's why I wrote a book about this, and I want to give a plug for my book. It's called
Absolutely.
The Modern Epidemic, and my new company is called Soul Sleep, as in SOL sleep, because without the sun, you won't sleep. My catchphrase, no sun, no sleep. Okay.
And where is the book available from Amazon and Barnes & Noble?
The book has still not been released, and it's been the hardest thing I've ever done to get this. This isn't a book like you should take magnesium or you should take vitamin K2. This is an indoctrination story to the story that I just told. I gave you all the keys, and I go into the details of why this all fits together, because it's kind of hard to believe. You are a forward-thinking guy. You know about alternative medicine, and so this isn't a shock to you, but to most people, they're very dismissive. Oh, I'm fine. This is my favorite. I get a ton of sunshine. I walk my dog twice a day. My doctor did my blood work and everything came back normal. I explain why that is so wrong. You don't know what vitamin D is, and you want to know. Trust me. And that's the other thing. I've developed a vitamin D meter so that you can test at home. And it should be ready for production shortly. I don't want to get too excited, but this is what's wrong with everybody. Once you restore your vitamin D level and you get proper sleep, all the things that alternative medical people do work better. All the treatments that you do are faster and easier to have more results and more success. If you love CrossFit, this makes your CrossFit better. If you do manipulations for chiropractics, it makes your body more flexible. This is a win-win to everyone. This makes all of our treatments and our treatment modalities easier, better, and more organic.
Awesome, Dr. Gould. So many pearls of wisdom.
All right.
I can't even count them. So for listeners and practitioners who'd like to get hold of you to get more information, where should they reach you?
So you can reach me directly through my new company, soulsleep.com, or at my office, Modern American Dentistry, just www.modernamericandentistry.com. And I get my messages, and I'd be happy to talk to anybody, especially anybody who's interested in learning how to set up a sleep screening program. This is something that all alternative healthcare providers should be doing. There's no reason why anybody who's concerned about their health shouldn't be getting involved in home sleep testing. This isn't a job just for dentists. This is the future. I envision a future where the metrics of health are the organic elements of your vitamin D status and your sleep. If we focus on those things, we'll let our bodies do what they were designed to do, self-repair.
Thank you so much for sharing, Dr. Gould.
My pleasure.
Maybe we can have you back on a future episode. This was great.
All right. Anytime. Thank you very much.
Good luck. Okay.
Bye.